Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you today. You have arrived at Vote Common Good, and today on Wednesdays we talk faith in the space of the common good. I'm Laura Truax, and I am just our lead in today. Doug Pageant is on his rear end riding along the southern border to bring attention to our border policies and the human courage and heartbreak that's happening along on our southern border. Today, we are in for a treat. We've got a brand new book just out, Danté Stewart's new book, Shouting in the Fire. It is a marvelous exploration of an awakening of Dante himself and what 2016 kind of lit in him and this journey that he has been on. To give voice to what's happening in our country. It's led him out of the church. It's led him into these amazing spaces, and he is going to lead us in this way of love today. So get ready, everybody, because it's going to be awesome. We are joined by our normal crew here, and I'm going to pass it over to Stephany Spaulding. Go ahead and take it away.
Good morning, and thank you, Laura. I am Reverend Dr. Stephany Spaulding, pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, and it is a beautiful Wednesday morning to be talking about faith, and I am excited about our author and conversationalist who is joining us this morning. So without further ado, I am going to pass it to Dominique so that we can get into the discussion.
Hey, good morning, friends. Dominique Gilliard coming to you from Conyers, Georgia, and excited to be with y'all. And man, we got a treat. My brother is going to bring the heat today. And just not only are we going to have a conversation about, faith today, we're going to talk about Black faith. And we're going to talk about kind of the evolution of how that fire in Dante's bones got there. And so I'm going to kick it over to my brother Stu and allow him to introduce himself, and we'll get into the content.
Good, wonderful. So good to be with each of you. My name is Danté Stewart. So many people call me Stu. And I am from a small rural town in South Carolina. I'm between actually three towns. So St. Matthews, South Carolina, which we affectionately claim Viola Davis and Mike Coulter. And we have Alshon Jeffrey, who played in the league, and so many others. And I'm between that town, small town, Swansea, South Carolina, and Sandy Run, South Carolina. So I did my schooling, my undergrad at Clemson University, where I met my wife, where I played football, and learned so much about life. And so now we are living currently in Augusta, Georgia, where I serve on staff at the historic Tabernacle Baptist Church as the Tab Global Digital Minister. But also, they having me, I'm pretty much a Renaissance man at the church where, I do things digitally, but also I do things physically each Sunday as we are now back, in actual physical service, physical gatherings. But also I'm a student at Emory University, where I am doing my degree now, doing my graduate work in modern religious thought and experience with a particular focus on the intersections of Black texts, theory, and theology. And I am the author of Shoutin in the Fire, an American Epistle, which just dropped yesterday.
Yeah.
And I also have two beautiful children. You can't see them up here, so I got pictures up here and things like that. Asa and Ava, and they are my darlings, my love, my beautiful children. So that's your boy, and I look forward to being with all of you today.
Yeah, Dante. One of the things that's really, I find nuanced in particular about kind of you and your formation and how you carry yourself in the world is that you are very intentional about claiming the significance of your rural upbringing. Can you talk a little bit about that and like why that has been so formative and something that you kind of really lead with?
Well, two things really. It really kind of grew out of my reading, and it also grew out of my conversation with other people as well. So when I was reading Heavy by Kiese Layman, I mean, he claimed that as a writer, that he's a Black Southern writer. And the many books that Kiese has written are very, I mean, they feel so Black and so Southern. And so as I got introduced to Kiese, who was Big Bro, who was just one of my hugest inspirations as a writer, that so many people, if they have been familiar with Kiese's work or the work of Jasmine Ward or Disha Filia, Robert Jones, Darnell Moore, Jason Reynolds, and the likes, Imani Perry, Eddie Glaude, if people are familiar with their work and the scope and the traditions in which they're writing in, they'll feel those voices within my own approach to my craft and to structure and to plot and to creativity and things like that. But, listening to Kiese talk about the South, particularly as he talked with, I'll never forget the talk that he had with Regina Bradley, Dr. Regina Bradley, who wrote the incredible book on Outkast called Chronicling Stankonia. Brilliant book. And they both were just relishing in the beauty of being Black and Southern and the ways in which, we have created art and created life and made something of life and things like that. But it also grew out of reading W.E.B. Du Bois. There was a section in my Black Lit class last semester where we did a critical examination of Souls of Black Folk, and I was reading the Norton critical edition of that book, and there were critical essays in there about Du Bois's view on Black people in the South. Du Bois is Black, one of the greatest, sociologists that breathed and lived on American soil. But coming from the North, Du Bois going to Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, he thought that Southern Black folk were backward and wayward. And so a part of me claiming that is kind of doing that work of Sadia Hartman in her book, Wayward Lives and Beautiful Experience. And looking at, the beauty of Black life in the South and me saying, I'm a Black Southern Christian writer, and forcing myself to chronicle that journey, to feel what the South feels like, to utilize the metaphors and the myths and the things that give us meaning around the dinner table in my apostolic Pentecostal church, in football and what football taught me, or playing basketball on dirt courts and things like that. And so I wanted to, as Terry-Ann Williamson says in her book Scandalize My Name, I wanted to take Black life and Black world making, particularly, not just in general, though we should do that, but the particular lives of Black people in the South and the particular way we make world and build worlds and make something of the world. I wanted, as Terry-Ann Williamson write, to realize that is as much a starting point as any other place.
Can I just ask a quick question, kind of an elementary question in some ways, Danté, that you started, the impetus for this book starts in 2016, right? And you're in a largely white church in Atlanta, is that right? In Atlanta?
In Augusta. In Augusta.
Okay, yeah. And you the 2016 election, the candidacy of Donald Trump started to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like even in the excerpts of the book, it sounds like it was an awakening of sorts. You started to see even the people in your church, right, through this different lens. So can you kind of talk about that? Because I think for some that'll be like, what? You're seeing it now in 2016, unpack that a little bit,
Yeah. So it really starts for me, kind of unpacking that part of my journey. It starts back home once again. So oftentimes, because many people believe that the Black South is backward and wayward, we in some sense inherit that belief as well. So oftentimes when we're in Black rural areas, in my area, interestingly enough, was known in South Carolina as the corridor of shame. And so we were at the bottom of the bottom when it came to socioeconomic status, when it came to education, when it came to jobs, when it came to healthcare. We were the bottom of the bottom. And, when you grow up that way, we didn't necessarily feel that. So we didn't think ourselves as shameful, nor did we think ourselves locked within a corridor and cannot escape. That was what was forced upon us. But many times when we live inside of a social world, there's an environment that oftentimes have scripts that we walk into. And so the script that many of us believe as youngins, is that, in order for us to make it, in order for us to be successful, in order for us to attain status inside of society and particular value, is our ability to assimilate and to perform in white spaces. And so the beginning of the unraveling as it relates to 2016, as I chronicle in my book, begins back home with the belief that, so many of us believe like, yo, I'm playing football back home. Yo, I got to make it. And making it for me was not going to HBCU, which we have many, 4 HBCUs in a close, many, maybe like 5 or 6 actually. In Denmark, South Carolina, in Orangeburg, South Carolina, in Columbia, South Carolina. For me particularly, it wasn't making it was going to the HBCU, but it was going to Clemson University or South Carolina, which I ended up going and playing football at Clemson University. And so that going to Clemson, that place, which was wonderful for me, Clemson was a great experience, in a sense, and but also I took for granted the type of person I was being socialized and discipled to be. As I write about in my book, that the closer I got to whiteness, the more I distanced myself from Black people and Blackness. And when you distance yourself from that, you almost escape within the white world, as Du Bois would speak of in The Souls of Black Folk. That for him, beyond the veil was, in some sense, beyond the veil was the lives of Black people that he write in the preface. But he says, I have escaped the world of the white man. And many of us, instead of escaping the white world, we escape into the white world. Some of us do it to cope with trauma. Some of us do it because we simply want to assimilate, and some of us do it just because we want to be ordinary and not have to deal with things, and we just want to be, and things like that. And so the unraveling for me begins at home, and then through Clemson University, which those two critical moments, and even going out to California. And beyond, really shape how I thought about my faith, how I thought about my life. For me, it was like, choosing white social and religious spaces really became the spaces that gave me meaning. And, yes, that happening in 2016, happening so quote unquote late, or whatnot. It just is what it is. It's a part of my story that I have become a person, who viewed whiteness and white people with sacredness, and viewed Black people and Blackness through skepticism, and through critical events that happened through Alton Sterling, through Philando Castile, through the response of white people. And more so than that, with me being around Black people, and more so than even that, my wife showing me ways in which the person I had become inside of these white spaces was so destructive and so harmful. It was through those catalytic moments that really the unraveling of what I named, what I saw, what I thought about the world began to take place, and then I began to change.
Can you press in a little bit further into that? So I have spent some time in Atlanta, went to HBCU, Clark Atlanta University, also taught in Orangeburg, South Carolina. So very much, yeah, very much familiar. And we are loving the praise, the early praise, as well as the current praise, as your book has just been released, and seeing like the natural kind of like doors opening up, and this conversation happening in white space about Black identity. But can you talk about whether or not you're experiencing resistance as you go home, being in Augusta or returning to South Carolina, to some of the things that you are speaking? Because it was a really hard time for me being in those spaces.
100%.
Being from Chicago and then going to, South Carolina and Georgia, and having just like a different worldview about who I was as a Black person. So can you talk about like the resistance even in Black community?
Yeah, 100%. That is thank you, good doctor, for asking that question. That is a very perceptive, like that really is a very perceptive question. And that question and that reality kind of shape how I wrote certain narratives in my book. One of the things that I kind of get exhausted with when it comes to Christian writing, especially particularly about Black life, is the ways in which it triumphalizes Black stories. and it collapses Black stories in this singular narrative, as if like Black life is always triumphant, like Black social spaces are always progressive, as if they're always liberative, and many times these religious spaces that we find ourselves in, and in our Black lives, whether it be educational, whether it be religious, these social spaces I meant, whether it be educational, whether it be religious, whether it be civic, oftentimes can kind of reintroduce us, or kind of reinforce. That's probably a better word. Can reinforce the damning narratives and dangerous narratives of white supremacy. Particularly, thinking about the ways in which Bell Hooks talks about the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. So if we think about Black life and Black social life and Black religious life simply as this kind of bashing of progressivism, then we're not telling an honest story. We're not telling the truth of the story, especially if you think about history. There's an incredible book on Black leadership. I have to kind of rethink. We're doing it in class right now. It's by Vincent Nelson, on the I want to say it's the rise and fall of Black leadership. And through this story, Dr. Nelson, I think he's Dr. Nelson, talks about the complexities of Black life and Black politics. That Black life and Black politics is not always liberating. If you're a Black man, then maybe if you're a cisgender Black man, then maybe Black social space, Black religious space can be liberating for you. But if you're a Black woman, if you're a Black LGBTQ, oftentimes those spaces reinforce the damning logics of patriarchy, of heterosexism, of classism, of sexism, of the ways in which anti-Blackness can function within Black spaces, in many ways. And the converging point is oftentimes religion. So even when we think about politics and things like that, people can say that Black Christians or Black Protestants or whatever oftentimes can have similar values regarding the intersection of religion and politics as white evangelicals, because in some sense white evangelicals have exploited Black religiosity. And I'm thinking particularly in the 1980s, the 1990s, and even in the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement is not this kind of triumphant movement where Black people were progressive and really standing for us.
Right.
Many of our denominational entities grew out of this critical moment of civil rights, where questions concerning Black life and what it means to embrace Blackness and Black life oftentimes created the same risks within across areas of race, gender, and class, and then in the 70s and 80s and regarding sexuality, which in some sense has always been the case. But as we thinking about when it comes to like this kind of intellectual rigor, arguing this kind of intersectionality of experiences in a public light. And so as I begin to change, I grew up Pentecostal, particularly apostolic. Mm-hmm. So when I begin to change, and even today, I had a book launch party the other day, and it was kind of weird, because I had my family there, and like many of them, they knew me when I was 18, and yeah, we still keep in touch, but now they know me at 29, and I'm a much different person. 10, 11 years later, I'm a much different thinker. I articulate things much differently. And I'll never forget that oftentimes me and my mother bump heads, both when I went into the white church and the person I became, but then also when I changed and, started taking seriously Black literature, Black theology, theory, Black studies and things like that, that oftentimes it created some type of rifts and things like that. So, yeah, I feel that struggle that you feel, and I empathize and sympathize with that struggle. And I think that is a struggle. That's a thing that need to be named, which Reverend Dr. I want to say his whole, he got so many titles now. Senator Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock, in his book, The Divided Mind of the Black Church, writes perceptibly about these moments in Black religious life. And toward the back end of the book, he talks about the ways in which, Black theologians and Black pastors and Black activists and Black people who are just living their lives, maybe working at Walmart, maybe working in transportation industry, just living and working, that we need to figure out ways in which we can bring ourselves together for critical whole healthy conversations where we're not just simply trying to argue a point and trying to develop a certain type of objectivity and abstractness where this one particular expression of Blackness and performance of Blackness is the one that's cherished and wins in the end, because in some sense we're just kind of recapitulating that which is anti-Black, that we learn in the dynamics of colonialism and through plantation life, and even the ways in which it's reinscribed within the intersections of law and religion and society. We don't need to be trying to trying to figure out who can win in the end, but we need to do the best we can to come together as community in our own particularities and subjectivities, as many Black feminists and womanists would talk about. We need to think about these various standpoints, and prioritize healing and wholeness, as many womanists would do, rather than simply, as they would criticize many Black liberation theologians, simply trying to be a winner through resistance. And I think, I think, as my friend Candace Bimbo writes in her new book, shout out to her in her new book, Red Lip Theology, which many people should get. We should all be womanist. Brilliant chapter, whatnot. So yeah.
So that's in addition to your kind of Black theological reflection and kind of insights, I really appreciate the way in which you have done some work on masculinity too. And so first I want to kind of touch base with the book, and I want you to talk to us about like how your encounters and your experience with DJ started to form some of your kind of unpacking of masculinity. But then I asked you to just kind of riff on that a little bit more about some of the work you've done with that.
Yeah, bruh. Brilliant question. And first of all, thank you for talking about this section. There's always sections in people book. I listen to book conversations all the time. And they talk about sections that many writers talk about sections that they wish people would talk about. And this is one section through all the interviews I've done so far, nobody has talked about just yet. And I think that this may be it was one of the hardest sections to write, but I also think that it's one of the most powerful sections that I ever wrote. Yeah. Particularly, I use a pseudonym for my teammate. I used a pseudonym, but during this moment, I'm a walk on. I'm playing at Clemson, and I done had that kind of mama we made it syndrome where I done got put on scholarship. I'm starting now. I'm balling, and I'm really like balling at this moment. And so I started to get lazy and become unaware of the ways in which, like, the things that I was investing in the field and my own self, the way or my lack thereof of investment was shaping who I was and what I thought. And so then, young brother comes in, highly recruited talent, incredible corner, incredible brother. Shout out to him. And we start to bump heads. We start to bump heads, as many athletes do. Nobody wants to lose their job on the field. Nobody wants to have people from back home asking them like, "Yo, what's up? Like, what's going on?" It's like that same question when everybody graduate and people be asking, "What you gonna do next?" I don't want to answer that right now. I don't know what I want to do. I'm just glad I made it through. Won't you? Hey, why you not asking that question? Lucille asked. Won't you come celebrate with me? Why you gotta ask me questions? Won't you come celebrate with me? And so, I did. Nobody wants to be able to wants to answer that question. And so,
especially when you come from a walk on to starting, and then
So nobody really wants to go through that. And so me and DJ really, we really started to bump heads. And I'll never forget where it was one practice where he was like, "Yo, I'm not moving. And our teammates had to separate us. And I remember the immense shame that I felt. I mean, I'm at this moment, I'm a redshirt junior. He's a true freshman. There's years of age in between us. There's years of leadership where now I'm in a leadership position, and things like that. And we end up bumping heads. And like the shame that I felt that I lost something that I earned, that I deserve, like, and things like that moment revealed to me the ways in which I learned how to distrust. I learned how to hate. I learned I wanted to destroy somebody who looked like me because of my own insecurities and fears. And so, like, I write about it. I was like, yo, like, I think that this was the moment where I first hated somebody who was Black, where the hatred was out of insecurity and fear and somebody taking something that I believe was mine. And then I wanted to really theorize about Black boyhood. And I'm gonna read a little bit. Y'all fine with that?
Yeah, let's do it.
Please.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I'm gonna read a little bit just because for people, I'm gonna give y'all this. Y'all the first community who gonna get this or whatnot,
Right
unless
on.
you already got the book, and I'm hoping that you already got the book and read this, and it's just gonna resonate and whatnot. So I write. We boys are taught real early that to be a boy means to take up space and to fight for space and destroy whatever is in the way between us and our dreams. That day I lost mine. The way I saw it, DJ took it from me. A deep shame came over me, the kind you feel when you know you failed and that you can't do anything about it. It was the shame of having to tell all the people back home who always thought I was going to the NFL while I wasn't playing at games, while my name wasn't being called. It was the shame of having nowhere to run and nowhere to hide from this failure. Playing college sports, you learn how to see the person next to you as a friend, but never too close. Each of your futures hangs in the balance. It is a terrible way to live. It is a terrible way to grow up. It is a terrible way to learn how to love yourself. It is a terrible way to learn how to love others. But it is the way I learned. You do what you have to do to prove that you belong where you do. To be Black and rural, and to find my body on the white campus with orange tiger paws was to be forced to prove that my body mattered as much as the name on the back of my jersey. I think for the first time that day, I hated someone someone who was Black. I think for the first time I wanted to destroy someone who looked like me the same way I saw white people learning to destroy us. I think it was the first day that I finally wanted another Black person to fail in all the ways we read about. I wanted him to fail in all the ways our parents warned us not to. I wanted him to fail in all the ways that will harm his white protection and his white resources and his white celebration. I wanted him to fail in all the ways I knew I was failing and was afraid to admit. This is how I learned to survive college. How we learn to survive college, by distrusting one another. I'll stop right there. But yeah.
Wow, that is it's so much to unearth and to unpack about like Blackness, about community, about self-efficacy, right? And it's also really allegorical in some ways that we think about Black relationship to spirit, Black relationship to religion, like football being, one of American sport in and of itself being a manifestation of American religiosity, right? And I am really curious because you lean heavily on people like Du Bois and Baldwin and that sense of loss, that sense of disruption. How can you speak to being in organized religious space, like holding on to that level of religiosity and religion and the church in general, whereas people like Baldwin walked away in a large sense because of the way that it was shaping Blackness, because of the way that it was not liberatory practice.
Oh, yes.
How do we, how does that conversation of being able to hold on to while trying to liberate the minds and the spirits and the beings of Black
Yeah.
people?
Yeah. This is a brilliant and beautiful question. Like, I am so enjoying this, y'all. Like, these are such great questions. Um, there is so much in that question, and I'll start with Baldwin in the church, and then I'm gonna move to Renita Weems, and then I'm gonna go to kind of us in our context right now. Um, so Baldwin, so for many people who don't know, many people may know I love Baldwin. I mean, in my bios, it's Jesus and James Baldwin. And in some sense, like that's kind of a signification of and a signaling of my love of the Bible and Black text. And my trying to weave both of those stories together. So if one can have a book of Jeremiah and Isaiah, and those lives, those embodied experiences, be the site of divine revelation, then I too believe that that my canon can also be, the book of Baldwin, the book of Morris, and the book of Bambara, their stories, as sites of divine revelation. But I don't know if many people know this, but for me, I'm doing my thesis on Baldwin. So I'm deep in Baldwin studies, have been deep in Baldwin studies for the last year and some change. And there's this really good essay on Baldwin. It's entitled Pentecostalism and All That Jazz. And it was talking about Baldwin's Pentecostalism. And what the writer argues is that, especially if we think about the Fire Next Time, if we do a close critical reading of the Fire Next Time, I made the case, and others have made the case, that the first half of the Fire Next Time can be, read as a prayer, and the second half of the Fire Next Time can be read as a sermonic gesture. It could be read as a sermon. So even though Baldwin left the place of Pentecostalism, Baldwin did not leave the power of his Pentecostal faith. Whether we think about the metaphors that he chose, the symbolism that he chose, even the ways in which Baldwin approached the craft of his writing, and the ways in which the type of structure of both of those texts, in the one on the first half of the text, or whatnot, it's from In My Dungeon Shook, is this very free flowing, intimate space between him and his nephew, where you're able to get into intimacy, almost what Elizabeth Alexander in her book The Black Interior calls the Black Interior, the space where you see the complexity of Black life, real and enactable Black power, particularly the ways in which Baldwin takes back the narrative. Even when he's talking about white supremacy, he talks about what the world made us, but he also talks about what we made ourselves. Here you were to be loved, baby, hard at once, forever to strengthen you against a loveless world. If none of us had not loved, none of us would survive. Then that argues the case that simply by him and his nephew being there is an aspect of survival that's actually a reality and not just a dream. So we did survive. We made something of ourselves. We made something of the world. And white people in their limited imagination did not have with us what they wanted with us. And so you see this kind of free-flowing aspect of prayer, where we're able to deal with the complexity of our lives, but also pray for what we believe can be possible. Hey, it was meant for you to perish, but you did not. So there is the affirmation, much like the psalmist, of what he became. But then, in the second half of the Fire Next Time, in Letter from a Region in My Mind, this is where I would say Baldwin is at his best, particularly as it relates to Baldwin's theological imagination. And this relates to what I'm going to say about Renita Weems in our context in this moment. Baldwin, as Douglas Field writes in Pentecostalism and All This Jazz, he criticized the ways in which the white church and white religion and white theology used the Bible and God to justify their own elevated, arrogant ideas of their own centeredness, their own morality, and their own purity. So Baldwin will argue, he says that if the concept of God is to have any use, it can only to make us larger and more loving. And if it cannot do this, then we must get rid of it. Baldwin is not talking about Black conceptions of God in this moment. He's coming off talking about a theological history of the interwovenness and interconnectedness of white religion and theological practice and the colonial project. He's talking about white religion, and he crescendos to say this type of God, this type of person needs to be dismantled. But then Baldwin flips Black religion on his head as well, where he says that when we left the church, that the passion to which we loved the Lord was not in some sense a measure of how much we love God and love people and love ourselves, but it was a measure of how much we distrust ourselves and hated ourselves. So Baldwin would criticize both white religion and white theology, but he would also criticize Black religion and Black theology because he knew them so intimately well. And so in some sense, though, for Baldwin to use his theological imagination, to use the framework and the metaphors of faith, Baldwin in some sense did not give up on faith as much as he did the critical theological work to reimagine faith. And this goes into what I read about and read from Reverend Dr. Renita Weems, beloved scholar of the Hebrew Bible. She was asked, why you stay in the church? Why haven't you given up on the Bible yet? And I absolutely love the way she answered this question. She said that I haven't given up. I'm paraphrasing here. It's in Rereading for Liberation in the book entitled Voices from the Margin, biblical criticism or biblical interpretation from the Third World. It's an incredible book that we use in Dr. Musa Dubey's class. And she says, why haven't you given up on the Bible? Why haven't you given up on faith? And things like that. And she says that there are so many women, Black women, that need to be free in the church. And she says, I don't want to give up on the Bible because I don't want to cut myself off from the conversations that I have inherited. And I think, as we're living in the tension of, this world and our faith and the ways in which our faith has been abused and used to harm others, I think that we need to do, as M. Sean Copeland writes, this kind of decolonial theological work, particularly as it relates to how we think about the body, how we think about epistemology and what we know, how we think about who can speak and who must be silent. So like when Audre Lorde in her joint Sister Outsider write, the transformation of silence to language, she ends the text with, there are so many silences to be broken. So the critical theological work that needs to happen, whether that's in the church or outside of it, needs to be who is silent within this space and what silence needs to be broken. Because I remember, if I'm not mistaken, I love the Bible. I remember Jesus saying in John 10:10 that the thief comes to kill, to steal, and to destroy. But I have come that you may have life and life more abundantly. And so it is as if Jesus is suggesting that whatever theologies and traditions that do not bring life are theologies and traditions that must be dismantled and decolonized and must be in some sense reimagined. But I don't want to put too much weight into holding on to theological frameworks, because I do think in some sense that many of the theological frameworks that we have inherited are inherently limited, and we need to think critically about theological frameworks and reimagining certain theological frameworks. Yes, there needs to be continuity, but there's also discontinuity as well. And so I believe, as Dr. Weems would write, as Baldwin would write, that there is something powerful within the religious imagination that can be liberative. And Jesus, when he says that he came to have life, he does not protect us from the traditions and theologies that bring death. He does not. But he does show us a better way in which, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and make people silent. But I have come, as Audre Lorde would write, that silences may be broken. And I think that is the critical theological work that I'm trying to embody and tried to do in even my own text, is weave through memoir, through criticism, through history, through narrative. This kind of theological imagination that I believe, can be a little bit more healing and helpful than many of the ways that many of us have learned, whether we were in white spaces or whether we were in black spaces as well.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow was right. Yeah.
And so we're coming to close, but I want to ask you, why the subtitle, An American Epistle?
Yeah.
Unpack that for us real quick.
So it really, so a few things kind of went into that. It really was like, Kiese, I loved heavy an American memoir. And so I was riffing on Kiese, an American Epistle. So it was like my signaling of like Kiese, he's flipping this American, what we deem to be American, what is American, what's considered to be the American memoir, and how can that be expanded or whatnot. And also, for me, I wanted to signal, an American epistle as this is my writing as a Black Southern Christian writer in the epistolatory form, which is just like so many of the greats in the Black literary tradition and canon. Like in some sense, so much of Baldwin's writing is in the kind of epistle form. So much of it is, it's in the essay, the essay, the poem, the whatever, the letter. So much of Baldwin's work is rooted in, taking this critical idea and my own lived experiences and trying to make sense of them. The same ways they did that in the biblical text. That the biblical text, that the epistle was always contextualized to the needs and the values and the visions and the realities of the communities in which they were writing. And if in some sense one can write an epistle as the expression of divine revelation, but also of our kind of lived experiences, then also I think I can write an American epistle, not the American epistle. I was very clear, an American epistle. This is only but one part of the story. This is not all the answers. This is not all the reality. Somebody else needs to write another epistle, and people have done that literary and critical and creative work, but me, I wanted to just be a part of the conversation, trying to continue the conversation and be a part of a noticeable Black tradition, so that this, yes, an American epistle, I wanted it to say like, yo, when you read this is like a letter. This is a love letter to Black folk, but this is also a letter to our country. And this is also a letter to myself, because I am not the hero of this story. I'm just the person who tells it. And neither are we the hero of the story. We are oftentimes the villain. I'm the villain in the story oftentimes, but we are the people who tell it. And I think that is the story that must be told. And that is that we like I write this line: being terrible is not the only way of being American. And for me, that sat at the heart of my epistle. I wanted to do it as a Black American Christian. Center of that story is, what does it mean to be Black and American and Christian? And my memoir kind of gesture toward wrestling through that question and things like that. And I wanted this epistolatory form to say, we don't have being terrible in these identities and the ways in which they intersect. Being terrible is not the only way we can be, but we can be healed. We can be whole. We can be free. We can be in love. We can be Black and beautiful and shout in the midst of the fire.
God, man, amen. I feel like I've just been to church. I feel like we've just been to church, right, everybody? Yeah. Hey, we got to bring it to a close. Keith Stanton in our comments are saying, you've convinced a white man to buy your book. I think you convinced a ton of people to buy your book. And more importantly,
I hope they buy it.
Yeah, right on, right? But to read it and to integrate it. If we can just
let me say real quick for folks.
Yeah.
If you audiobook people like myself, Danté reads the book. So if you love the cadence, you love the feel, then you can get more of it by getting the audiobook.
Yeah.
And interesting story about the audiobook. Let me say this real quickly. This is like a weird writer thing. So I wrote my book and I read my audiobook all to one song. Literally. Like
Wow.
literally, I wrote my whole book to one song. It's called The Exhibition by Max Richter. And so when I was reading my audiobook, I would put one headphone in, put the other headphone here, have my music going real low so that it'd help me on my cadence and pacing and the emotion of my text to kind of get me in the feel of how I wrote the text. So there are moments in the song that are like up and down and inflection and going low. So you'll hear it in the audiobook. So yeah, that was a cool story, that I love to tell about, that
It's
process
just,
is that
it's
song.
super
Yeah.
cool. So it's Max Richter, and what song is it again?
The Exhibition.
The Exhibition.
I'm
Okay,
going to
you
get it now.
guys. That's right. Well, thank you, Dante. What a delight.
Wonderful.
It's been inspiring. It's been all the things that opens your heart and allows you to see a bigger world and the liberating power of Christ alive in the world and of witnesses all
Wonderful.
around us. So thank you so much. You guys, we're signing off now, but Common Good will be back tomorrow morning. So join us. We are grateful to have Danté Stewart bringing the word to us today, Shouting in the Fire, an American Epistle, reimagining the spiritual virtues of rage, resilience, and remembrance. Thanks again, everybody. See you next week.